Painting from life presumes a lot of variables. Things don't just hold still. The very nature of the thing, the life, suggests that we're talking about variability. So the question of today's question is asks us to consider, and including considering whether I put too much emphasis on painting something fixed and telling us to make things exactly the way they look. And I do, and I do say that virtually. But before we go anywhere, I want to thank Lauren Kay for her donations to this and her ongoing support for this channel. There are a dozen or so of you all who have been really, really faithful in maintaining us. And everybody out there owes you a debt of thanks. All 19,000 of you subscribers. So far, I think Mr. Producer has been paid, not well paid, just normal, but he receives his pay, and it's thanks to you. So thank you very much for this particular week's donation, Lauren K. So let me read his points. I feel there's something unsaid about the Impressionist process, says Geronimus. Something I've been struggling with, even as I feel I'm learning much from your visual order approach. The model with the beautiful white dress on, blowing in the wind. That'd be a Benson, you're going to see it in a minute. Much of your advice seems to presume a still life or a photograph as a subject, where nothing about the image will change, especially if the light source is fixed. You tell us again and again to invent nothing, right? To use only the visual data available to us. Visual memory being infinitely preferable to formulae. But short of using manakins, draperies never stay still, and neither incidentally do models. This is the first time you hint at a role for the imagination in the kind of impressionist work you do. And I'm not looking at that video. I don't know. I don't remember which one it is. But I'm not sure what you're saying exactly. Is it that the memory built up by hours of slow study of draperies on a mannequin or in a still life will inform decisions that must be left, at least partially, to our capacity to invent the plausible rather than capture the actual on a windy day? That's that very last part of this, capturing the actual on a windy day. Thank you, Geronimus, for sending this in. I really appreciate by the way, a number of things you've written. It's very thoughtful, and you're definitely in the game. You're definitely all there when it comes to most of the stuff I'm agreeing with, or maybe agreeing is a funny word, but I'm liking where what you're running into is taking you. It's going to be, you're going to have good results as a result of the kind of thinking you're putting in. So right now I need to say, all you guys who make comments, put out questions, opinions, whatever, keep this thing moving that way. I prefer to have to do my work from your experience, from what comes up from your experience. I'm not interested in quarreling over people who work in a different way, but for people who are working like this, or trying to be like Boston School type impressionists, whatever you're going through, it's common to us, right? Probably. And it's worthy of discussion, worthy of bringing out there for other people to think through as well. So, but thank you for that. So let me just make a few points. I'm going to use images in a second, but I want to just say a few things that are to make this really clear. In the first place, student training is based on subjects with limited variables. Now, first of all, we've said that painting from life is full of variables. The light changes. Painting in artificial light is different from painting in north light. So the light changes in those situations. But there are if you are working away and you're suddenly standing in a different place on the floor, you'll have variables. You're the variable. There's so many kinds of them in that class, but so but understand that the main objective of a student doing still life is because it does hold still. We've reduced the number of variables substantially from if you're painting a live model, a figure model, especially a draped model of any kind, a portrait. The variability of clothes and hair and all those things. I mean, one of the reasons you try to get women to put up their hair when you're doing figure work is just to avoid having to deal with these constant changes. That's real stuff, But reducing the variables is a big deal, because then you can at least have a good conversation with somebody who's trying to give you advice. You can stand there and look at the same thing from about the same location, and get a useful critique out of that. The second part of it is, of course, you just need to get good at something that doesn't have this opportunity for you, I'd have to say, to say, but the model moved, but the model moved. It's a good thing to not have that option. So that's just goes with the territory of beginning students, and the idea is let's keep the variables out of this thing, okay? But painting from life, as I said, is rotten with variables. Everything's changeable. Lots is changeable. You can't get the figure back in the same pose. I'd say you have to get really skillful at getting the figure to approximate the same pose. But one of the things that goes with the territory of painting with your eyes is that there's a certain forgiveness in painting an approximate figure. The model comes in and your measurements of a minute ago aren't any good, and you can't figure out precisely how to move that model. I say your measurements if you're working from a measurement brain. So there's a degree of variability that is acceptable. There's a degree of difference that we're not trying to fixate on. So, and yet there are a lot of things that we are. So there's a character of for example, the contour. If that's significantly changed, you have to make sure you move the model back into pose. You have to get good at putting models back into pose. But one of the things I want to say, though, about this is you have to recognize what's a given and what's a variable. There are things that are standard. You have to keep the model standing in the same location on the floor, right? You have to keep your distance from the model the same every time. You have to, in other words, don't have too many variables, okay? Limit the number of variables. And then get to know what the givens are. The model always stands here. The head is always turned so that the nose just comes this far from touching the cheek. And then there's numbers of ways in which parts of the body relate to the other parts of the body. The figure has to stand on the same leg. You can't just have the model switching legs when the pose is set, right? So one of the things we do is when the model starts getting tired and starts very subtly shifting the pose, we get them out of the pose and have them walk away, go take a break, come back and try to hold the pose again. We want to eliminate the variable. So it's a big deal to know what's a variable and what's a given, okay? And in your drawing, it's the same thing, There's going to be this element of the given. So you're going to say, here's the top and bottom. I'm not moving those. Those become givens, okay? And you'll find something that sets it up left and right, so that you can say, and this is going to mark this hip over here is going to mark that point's never going to change this way. That's going to be I'm going to base the whole location of the figure on a location like that. These are classes of givens. The elbow may move a little bit, may go up, may go down. If you're watching the elbow go up or down, you may suddenly say, wow, that's not where we said it, but I like that better. Now, if this is your private model, if you're working with other students, that's not, you can take advantage of those things, but you don't want to fight for them and wreck the pose that was, you can't get yourself back into accommodating the other students. But understand that you said, well, I'm going to say this at the top, I'm going to say that's the bottom, and I'm going to put this place. These are keys to your painting. These are places that are fixed in your painting. If you're doing a whole ensemble like a picture, you want to be aware of where your exits are in the picture, and you want to establish them. These are fixed locations. Things like that are fixed. There's a whole bunch of these things that are fixed. You're not going to go switching them around, and certainly not thoughtlessly. If you do switch them, you have to rethink your whole placement. Your whole viewfinder, your whole picture. through the viewfinder. Uh, so so there's the givens in the pose itself. The pose model will always stand there, always stand back here, always might even mark a place on the floor here, And then when you look at the model, whatever it is, you make sure that model aligns in the same way in relation to the background as they did before, etc. Right? Of course, you want those things, but you don't expect to glue the hair into place. The hair is not going to be there for you. It's not going to stay in one place. Now, I want you to remember one thing I think it's useful to say is that their whole exercise is one of impressionist honesty. We're trying to paint what's actually in front of us, and the more fixed it is, without taking the life out of it, of course, the more fixed it is, the more true we can be to nailing that phenomenon, that impression, right? This isn't just a picture. If you're just trying to make a successful picture, you can lie, cheat, and steal. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. But you're painting an honest impression. These things do matter, right? You're trying to say the impression is from this view. It's, that time of day, talking Monet, say, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? So, and you're trying to maintain the truth of the impression. So let me just look at a picture or two. So here you have the still life mentality. This is an interior, and it's a little more difficult for the student to do than a still life, and to get it to be true. But numbers of things in this thing were there were decisions made about exits. About how much rug would show up over here. There are numbers of things that were keys, which you might call keys to the location of stuff in this picture. But the day varied. In fact, this only worked in the morning. It didn't work in the afternoon, or the other way around. I can't remember which it was. The afternoon, the light would be too different, right? You see the sun is hitting this sunroom back here and bathing that, whatever that is, in heat. So you understand that, but still, mostly this is just fixed. The shapes aren't going anywhere. The relationships of things are going to be the same no matter what, except for the little bit of color stuff, or the light-based stuff as the day changes, or as the different types of days pass through. On the other hand, when you talk about these things here, everything is variable here. I mean, the movable light effects in this Zorn, if this is an actual situation, this light will be there for a second, the bus is going to turn a corner, and the light's going to disappear off her cheek. So those kinds of variables, if it were a slice of life, and I don't think that is, actually. I don't know if he painted these figures in a studio where he just made up that background and then added in the effect of light. There's a lot of things one can do, but this is in the class of what you call an impressionist picture, because it's a slice of life. It appears to be just that bus. You're standing there watching people in a bus, et cetera, et cetera. So it has that element of slice of life. This has that, the variability of, you can't figure out what the things are. The sun is moving constantly. And so the dots on the critters themselves, everything's in motion. The dots, the light spots on the hermit in the woods, the whole coloring of the woods is affected by the movement of light. This is, this phase of Monet's career, he's painting 20-minute windows because he's saying the variations are very noticeable every 20 minutes. So he's popping up a new canvas. These are sort of on the later side of his career. And he's really settling into eventually what brings us this big, wonderful shift. But you can see that his placement of things, it is what it is. But what I mean to say is he's basically putting down spots of color. His game is to produce the atmosphere based, the atmosphere of the day, the total visual impression with everything it's got. And it's way less focused on drawing of things. There are elements of stuff that resemble things out there, but you can see that his focus is different from that. But the light being variable, he's not trying to paint it all day long like Bunker did when he painted those Medfield pictures. So this is the one you're talking about, the one on the left here, and this is clearly a very beautiful example of the Monet thing with the figure, where he's trying to, where he's really beautifully portraying the day. More so even than these. These begin to look like an illustration. We got all the girls in there. It looks like a little family portrait and all that sort of stuff. What's variable in these pictures? What's fixed in these pictures? She's standing here. She's posing like this on the hillside, whatever. This is variable. The cloud's location is constantly changing in front of her. Her hair is undoubtedly blowing. Things like this could become smaller or bigger. Things like this could become smaller or bigger. What I'm about to say now, though, is that what happens is when you're doing these kinds of things, you may make adjustments for composition, and you will. In other words, when you go out and paint a slice of life, it's almost never a complete composition. I'm trying to get you to go out there and find one that's pretty dang fun, and don't grab something that's just really going to be just in need of fixing the minute you got it. Like a bad used car. You want to go out there and find something that's already got some charm, some serious charm, and a compositional sense. A reasonable composition based on what your best knowledge is at the time. But you can see a thing he might have changed, for example, might have been, it might have affected composition, the size of this. See this one here? See how much bigger this island is in this picture? Now, it's possible he's just standing in a slightly different place or standing further back or whatever to make these things more nearly the same size, or have this one further away. He might have been standing up closer. But the point is, in composition, that has a different expression. It gives you a different feeling, like a greater grandeur, the scale is kind of impressive. It produces a very different effect. Well, that's the kind of stuff you can make adjustments for. It's a compositional thing, right? But you're not going to change this note to a different kind of a note based on something in your head. You're going to try to maintain the unity of the visual impression just as it appears to you. Now you can see this is actually richer. So I don't know what the difference is unless he did make that one up. And at that point, he's painting aerial perspective out of his head. Well, if he is, he's probably doing what Degas said Corot did. He's probably grabbed a different part of the hill, maybe a different hill over somewhere else, further away, and painted those notes. But he's trying to maintain the unity of the general impression. I doubt that much of this, if any of it, comes in the category of learned information, like aerial perspective. I mean, we're always aware of things like that, or this thing could have gotten bigger or smaller depending on what the compositional benefit is, right? These are what I call total variables. The hair, there is a basic shape there. What it's doing in minor parts, you can see is different in these two sets. Just there's a slight difference in those two. So, and this is wildly variable. You could do anything you wanted in here. And here he's added some specks, bits of white flowers or whatever. Yeah. But that just gives you the idea of what we mean by variables. The fixed thing is her location on the page, presumably, obviously. And he's not going to move her. He's settled on that. So whatever he does, if he puts something here and it wrecks the balance, he's going to probably put something else elsewhere, wherever he has to recover the balance, the equilibrium of the picture, etc. On the other hand, when it comes to the blown out skirt, this skirt is undoubtedly whipping back and forth, billowing here and there. And it's going to be, it's a formy thing. It's blowing out, forming up. He has to decide where he's going to put that if it's variable. But it is a thing that he actually sees there, right? Now, the fact that it's moving doesn't mean it doesn't have significant form. You can see the form here is not that much different. It's in a different location and longer. It's more like going through here. But it's still formy. It's still a large form. In the same sense as the cloud over here is more round, more formy than the flatter ones over here. It's formy. So if he hits this with the notes that are there, he can still move it over and hit it with the same notes. Now you'd say at that point that he might be, well, is he lying? No, he's just using something that is a variable. It's something that could go this way or that way. And sometimes it's just, you just maintain the look. The color notes that made this, just put them over and make it over here. That would put you in the plausible range, right? Where that then can, won't take away from the big impression, but it'll give you a slightly better design, perhaps. So, yeah, etc. Yeah, well, that gets the idea across, I think. I don't know how much more of this we actually need. the kids out here, they're not highly noodled up for a very good reason, and it would have been very, very difficult. But he's also an impressionist. He's painting his family bathing in the sun, as it were, at the edge of the water, just having a really pleasant family day outside, as it were, right? Just playing together in the sunshine. The fixed stuff probably literally feels like it's really fixed. It's these trees, all this stuff. He seems to have considered that a grid. It seems to be very fixed. And he's done other things. He's undoubtedly decided on the location of this woman, the pink, whatever. But these kids, they can be all over the place. At some point, you've got to settle down and make decisions about them. But any of these kids, in some sense, like in these, sometimes you see, hear about Sorolla, these kids might be running around a little bit. He really is, as an impressionist, just really needing to get the notes of this, the color notes of this kid, and what you might call the visual, the purely visual content of the kid, and find a nice place for it, find a good place for it, So, but that's the way it goes. Everything else is a variable. These things are variables. These are in some sense less variable. They can be changed for composition, but they're less variable in the sense that if it's a particular type of day, you could say, let me just get it when it's at such and such a time because I like the way that angle works with relation to the rest of the composition, etc. And the time of day stuff, that's variable, right? So he's got to get this while those streaks of light are there. I've done one of those just recently, streaks on an autumn, over a pond in the autumn. Just, I had 45 minutes a shot, and the change was so great. So I picked a moment in the change, used notes that were around there, that were essentially part of that, and then every day I could check it. So I was able to get back to 3 different times, and it could review what it was doing with those new notes that I added presumptively, saying, oh well, that note, I saw it. I just used this note. I continued to use it, even though the change had already happened and gone away. I was still using it, et cetera, et cetera. That's the way it works. But everybody who paints from life knows that we have these variables, don't you all? This is sort of an exotic level of variables, but he sort of turned the work down here into being more fixed, didn't he? He's trying to make it more fixed. The tree branches look like they're fixed, but they're undoubtedly we're moving all over the joint. So these become compositional decisions. The spottiness of the stuff on the boat here, that's variable. That could be, he could pick spots for that, which, whatever this is doing, he can do that in such a way. It looks like he's doing it in such a way that is harmless. If he does it up here on the face, it gets much more difficult to maintain the unity of your likeness. On the other hand, whatever. Nobody's going to be able to paint the water. These things happen. I mean, say paint it, meaning you can suggest it, though. You can actually find the right color notes. You can find this movement from blue into the lighter and warmer stuff up into here. That's something you can get, and it'll be pretty sound if you're looking at just this color compared to this color, or the yellows or the greens, if you see what I mean. But the particular notes in here, you'll notice whether they have soft edges or sharp edges, and there'll be a whole bunch of other stuff like that. You might even notice patterns like this. The boat may be making sort of eddies around itself, over time. It might be gradually doing that. This one doesn't appear to be, but you might start noticing patterns like that and begin to use those. But which one are you going to paint? They're all over the place. So it's all in the class of rather using the actual note that's there, part of the impression that's actually there, but it's nevertheless suggesting and not actually trying to model up a particular one which doesn't come back again, ever. So that's really a total variable in that situation. So, and this is a case where Duchamp is doing a similar thing. He's got a dress that is probably blowing in the wind, or could be. Feels like a very still day, actually. But one of the things you're trying to do in a start is you're trying to establish things. So you want really to beautifully establish the effects and the locations of key things, right? Strong readers and key things, and establish the composition in its place on the page, so that you eliminate the number of variables. You try to establish what I'd call the non-variables, the pose of the sitter. So there's a lot that you can establish. And then again, painting from life, there's things you have to not just have to stay awake to, but you want to stay awake to the possibilities it gives you. At some point, the blowing of the dress gave a little bit of an up curve here, when a minute before it might have been just sitting straight and boring. but it blew out a little bit, and he saw the compositional advantage to that, or the life-giving quality of the full-blown curve, and so on. Then he has, the trees are obviously totally variable. I mean, he's saying here that they're darker and massier up here and break out into little bitty things down here. Probably generally true, but it's also true that he possibly posed it there because the girl gets beautifully featured here by having those darks around her. This is a sort of a classic case in point. You have to establish things like the location, like the top of the head, or you have to get some of these major locations well placed, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? You really have to say what's fixed in this thing. Again, maybe up to getting this and some of this into here. Maybe that would be your classic fixed place. You can see the chin is lost virtually, right? So it's not in that sort of strong fixedness, but still there's a whole lot of this that's wanting to be known. That's what we mean, in mathematics. There's the knowns and the unknowns, or the variables. So when you're working along an area like this, you're trying to find something that you're going to say, and let me just establish that. I'm going to establish that. And then you have the opportunity to lose other things, but you're starting to say, and I'm going to maintain this because of the blast of light and the power of that beautiful effect, et cetera, et cetera. And so it goes. Yeah, the time of day, I mean, the lights, if it's a sunny day, the sun's going to be moving on her face. So this shadow line is not going to stay the same. Neither is this turning form going to be in the same location all the time. So those are the kinds of things that you have to pick the time of day and get them before the sun moves much, or you lose it. You can't hold it, and you can't just keep chasing it. You can't chase it, so you have to fix a spot in your mind. Again, we got to get to this fixedness mentality. You have to fix a time on the clock, so to speak, on the sundial. But in the meantime, you can see how beautifully he's articulated in broad, general ways the great form of the hair, the grand form. These guys are great. He has a great feeling for form. De Camp does. So let's see what else we have. So the portrait is the same way, though. Portrait, you could say, is like a still life. You can virtually fix it, except you can't really fix it, right? You can largely get it right. You can get the guy. You can even tape it off so the guy's arm lands in the same place on the, mark the arms of the chair, and then go up there and move the drapery on him so it's about the same every time. But it'll never be precisely the same. But you'll learn ways to get it essentially the same. And then, we really are doing, this is the Gamble thing, we're just really looking for changes that might benefit our composition. So maybe at one point the hair showed a little extra stuff where maybe it had been all padded down over here before, and all of a sudden showed a little extra stuff and gave some life to the painting, et cetera. Those are the kinds of things that would happen. This thing is changing. Maybe the minute he found it more interesting was when it split over on this side. Maybe that had been very simplistic, but it was not as interesting as suddenly he saw this and he said, and remember, you're always after those kind of two things, something that works better with your composition or something that makes the picture more interesting. But it's always a sort of a both and kind of a thing. So who knows what hands he may have started with, but he wound up with these and the way they play to each other and the way they play to, the light, the spotting, the distribution of them on the page and all that stuff. That's all stuff that's in the class of somewhat variable for a while. But you're trying to settle on it in that first wave in the start. You're trying to settle on the great main elements of the composition. The variables now that we're talking about wind up being things like in the drapery. All of a sudden this thing shows up as a long line, and you realize that maybe there's a whole set of sort of long lines that make just because that shows up. Now we see that they're not all over here. Now we've distributed those kinds of long lines through the whole painting. Maybe that's a good thing. You suddenly see how this works all broken up over here, and you say, oh yeah, I got a series of those. There's that broken up area. There's a broken up area. Blotchy area over here. Oh yeah, look at that. And their timing, you look at how they land in relation to each other and how big they are, et cetera, and who's the strongest. You begin to realize, and this is a whole world of relationships, that that's a good thing and you keep it, right? That's a big deal to figure out what to keep. In other words, there are the knowns, but if you let everything be variable, you're going to be in no end of trouble. Everything is not variable. So when you fix the when you fix the exits or when you fix the top of the head and the bottom, even if you just fix the head in this location and just say, I'm going to base everything on the size of a head being 9 inches or 10 inches or something. But everything else you do is going to be based on your big compositional ideas. Every little thing you do is based on what's already there and what's given. All right, so you need to settle on the givens, find out who they are and how they are given, and draw them well. And no matter what you bring in, you pay attention. You correct them to that. You to those givens. You organize them around that. Do you see what I mean? But every time you go, these variables, you're trying to find a place to turn them into non-variables. You're trying to turn them into fixed things. Doesn't mean that, like, it could be the blow of that dress, but it's still going to be something you've based on a compositional idea. It may be something the way it plays to this and to this, or it could be something about the way it picks up something else over there, or the timing between this or it might be the feeling of where this form is compared to this form. So it may be a set of forms that you're actually, do you see what I'm saying? But it's trying to gain a reason to be there, okay? Now, how you acquire it, what you use there, it's all based on what's sitting in front of you. You're not making stuff up. If the world here, if you've done your job as an impressionist and you hit the notes and you've got this color field working, you're not going to change any of that out of your head. There won't be anything like that going on. Everything you're doing is, so that's where I said, it's like Degas said about Corot. He looked over there and found a tree over there and he brought it into his picture. You see what I mean? But it's something from in the picture that's part of the inherent impression, okay? That's going to be one of the key things to all this stuff. So let's see, what else? One thing I do want to mention is that you see this Ang is doing drawings for the drapery, and you can see how totally this drapery has changed, this design for the drapery. And by the way, this again is Gamble talking about design versus composition. The grand abstraction, the great color scheme, that's all composition. When you get down into local areas, the designing, the organizing of these little bitty elements that are sort of like each other and they travel from here to there, Gamble would like to call that designing. And I like that differentiation. Composition, grand stuff versus the design. The local design. So you think that's probably a better way to say it. But what Gamble would be very onto us if we were doing a portrait to go after and design. That'd be fundamental to him, to design the drapery. Well, the model, you can try to get it better on the model, and then someday it just won't come that way, but you need it because of the design. And now you have to be very clever. If it doesn't do that, then what the heck are you forcing it for? Maybe you need to rethink your design. If you can't but it's still going to be in that class, though. What you're trying to do is find a way to make, if you can see that your lines are going to be fun. Most people err on one of those sides or the other. They'll just make all the lines fun and destroy the model's arm, or other people will just make the arm and don't care about the design, and they will wreck the arm actually in the process by doing that. In any case, I'm just showing you there's a lot of variables. You've seen all the changes he's made. The whole thing gesturally is different. This is more vertical and hoop-like. Well, this is more tilted this way, right? The whole thing is running off a little more in this diagonal. So there's a whole bunch of that in big ways, and then the distribution of the leading effects that make up the dark marks, that make up that aspect of the sort of control the design. It's all been shifted. It's all been significantly shifted. There are parts of this, like this one here, that looks like it might have just been grown bigger to become this here, or whatever. A lot of times dresses will stay the same, but if you put them on mannequin, obviously, they will stay more the same. But Ang said he was opposed to using the mannequin, what you call the lay figure. So, and again, what do we have? You hit big notes. You find you dress a model so they're beautiful to look at. They are part of a beautiful color scheme. Get the head to go beautifully with whatever the model's wearing, and get the pose to talk. Bring life to it. Do all that stuff. Place it well right through the viewfinder. Get it well placed on the page. And just get a great lay-in. Get it started to look like nature. Just straight up look like nature. And things will happen along the way. Suddenly you'll see something that, that could go this way or that way. The hand pose, for example. That could, maybe earlier it showed a thumb as well and it was awkward. Maybe all of a sudden it showed more grace and she just accidentally put it that way. Sometimes you might actually ask her to change the pose of the hand for graceful reasons because of your composition, hopefully, right? There's a nice way in which this sweep here, and the sweep of the hand generally, sweeps with this. There's a beautiful correspondence in those things. Well, anyway, but there's going to be there's all kinds of variables, and not the light of the day obviously is going to be one. You can't change. You don't change the pose, the painting's colors every time the day changes. If you look at my violinist, high-speed violinist, you can see, and I think we had at least 10 different days in this 13-day pose. You have to figure out how to maintain the things you know for sure while you work with the things that are still being resolved, right? Yeah, that just goes, all that stuff just goes with the territory of painting from life. So I don't know if there's anything really new or different in any of that stuff. But this is a lay-in, you've seen this before in more developed versions of it. But all this stuff, for example, I posed everything in here, so it's a still life. Everything is set up and fixed. Most paintings have that opportunity. When you find a landscape and you put yourself there, most of the landscape ain't going anywhere, right? So you have a lot of stuff that you might say is clearly fixed, right? Hopefully when you're looking through a viewfinder, you fix certain things like the location of that tree, plus whatever it is, person standing next to it, just the way you want it exactly, the size you want it, and the location you want it on the page. And that's a fixed idea, right? And you don't want to be switching that stuff around insanely. That's why I said too many variables. Let's not have too many variables. But immediately you get into one like this, you fix your exits. You find those exits, you nail them. You place the top and bottom of the main event. I'd consider the bottom to be this thing plus some of this. Even some into here, that might be what I call the bottom. You get that where you want it on the page. Well, you get this thing up here, this area situated just where you want it, and get the placement toward on the left side here, because it's a strong line, and place that exactly where you want it, right? Call it a non-variable. It's not a variable, even though the model is going to come in every day and be slightly different. Your job with a model is to learn to correct the model to the pose without torturing the model, by the way. And it's not that difficult to do, actually. But you do have to use your memory. You have to have learned things about the pose. So you can't just sit there and expect the model to do it. You actually have to know exactly how much weight you want on this leg. You have to know what plumbs with what at certain key time, how much rotation affects that plumb and how much the plumb is caused by having too much weight on the other leg. You have to notice when the model starts slipping out of the pose. You have to figure out how to fix all these variables. Just because the model changes doesn't mean you're a victim, right? And you shouldn't think that way about the drapery of that dress either. Just because the wind billows and is going this way and that way and this way and that way, you're watching the thing as a whole. There's so many fixed things, and your composition's already well set, and you keep watching that to see where that moment is when it's doing the most magic, the thing that corresponds best to the grand plan that's already being established as you see it, as you work. As I said, every time you make a move, like I moved this at one point, I remember moving this hand over to get further over to cut out a better shape out of that leg. It wasn't as interesting when it just comes sort of weakly down and didn't. And but I remember doing that, and that became a fixed point. That became something I would use from that point forward to set the pose, right? And you can't just do it with the hand, obviously. You got to make sure the rotation is right. The center of the figure is rightly related to the, between left and right, and so on. So, yeah. But yeah, that's such a big deal, though, to figure out what you know for sure, and then try to bring your variables into certainty. Why is it there? There's got to be a compositional reason why it's there. You're not just if you were just making a likeness, you'd be chasing the wind. But what settles the whole thing down is composition itself. You know what I mean? So you have spots out here, these spots on this cloth here. Eventually they're going to have a much better idea where they're going to go as the composition settles itself down better, as you get to know it better. It might have some relationship to these spots over here. And all of them might have, really, who knows what else they are going to find themselves related to. But these correspondences are what are going to give you confidence that you got what you want, you got what you need. And but you can say, and this is something I need to say, though, that if this thing here has to move somewhere, you can still paint it as if it was right here. I mean, in other words, you could move it over there and paint it that way and try to get away with it, because you haven't lost anything about the visual impression in doing that. your colors aren't different or anything like that. If it just looks goofy because somehow the form should have changed, you can, at the end of the day, you can move that drapery over and get the look back. You can get the look you really want. Rotate the cloth around on this table or whatever it's sitting on. This fold up here, you can put that somewhere else. The right thing to do, according to Gamel, if you have problems like that, is to paint it exactly the way it looks and stay with it until the composition evolves more. And then at some point toward the end or at the end of the painting, you can say, no, but it's definitely clear that this should be better somewhere else. And then you can try it over there. Or you can try it before that, back and forth. But then at some point, go over there and change it in nature. So that in some sense, you're always kind of painting a still life, but you're always bringing everything into being a still life. In other words, in being certain, having the certainty as if it were fixed in space. You don't want to look fixed. You want to look live. But it is that look of the certainty that everything knows where it's there and what it's doing. And that's why so much of it's about composition. When you're studying a curve like this on the body, the belly, just the bellying of it, if you're not aware of what it talks to, you're not doing composition, right? But you're not even doing seeing. But that's the seeing that leads to composition, to the beauty, to the concept. So if you find that may be what the source of something like a grand S curve, you might suddenly realize there's a beautiful line here, and all you were trying to do is get this more accurate, and then you realize, now I can see what it is because of what it's doing, and that's when you start, being involved in, all of a sudden these things aren't just accurate. Now they're the drivers of the beauty that's in those, shall we say, accuracies. I haven't found that you can get that the accuracy, so to speak, by itself will ever get you beauty, but I've found that beauty will make you more and more accurate. So I wonder if I should leave it at that. Let me just take one more look at at some of the points here, see if I've missed anything. One thing I would say is that there is the idea of it's always a discipline. And you're always disciplining yourself around the likeness. And there's always this battle between it and the unity of the composition, right? So that's one of those things that creates variables, is that a thing in nature isn't satisfying. There's got to be a compositional reason, but if you can't find the reason, you may as well just paint it the way it is for a while. Keep on going and try to fix it. I'll try to make it better. The other thing I would suggest you think about doing, though, is the ability to pre-picture the adjustment. So you're picturing that billowing piece of the drapery. Picture it lower. Picture it way down lower. And now, if you know how to do relationals, this is not going to be a difficult problem. You're going to see it down lower, and you're going to see what it relates to. If it's on a curve, it'll relate to curves. If it's a billowing form, it'll relate to billowing forms. If it's white, it'll relate to whites. You know what I'm saying? And the ways in which it does it are going to give you confirmation about whether it ought to be moved or not. But you need to have the capacity to treat it as if, like, put your thumb over it and see it moved somewhere else. And try to train that ability in yourself to be able to see that. But bringing in knowledge from the past, that's not much of a thing. From today's painting, you can bring in knowledge from today's painting into other parts of the painting. You can definitely do that, and I think you probably have to, just to make just to bring your likeness into beauty. Yeah, that's the way I think about it, Geronimus. I've had to do this video twice, so I'm afraid I may have left some things out. The bottom line for an impressionist is maintaining the truth of the big impression, right? And it's not so much a little thing, lots of little things, eyelashes going this way or whatever. It's not that. It's usually in bigger things, and winning there is the main event, right? Winning in these, in the greater idea that you have to express, right? The greater visual, the beauty of that visual impression. So, all right. I think that's it for today. Yeah, you do learn things. You do learn things by working in nature. If you're painting landscape, you're gonna be aware of things that you might use in this picture, but you're not going to steal them. You can't glue them in. If it's a grade A, you're not going to glue them into a sunny day picture, etc. You know what I mean? But there's always that. You're always learning stuff from what you did before. Look of nature, relationships of notes and things like that. But I like to come into the space, into the new problem with a new brain. I like to have a completely open mind. And I don't like to bring those things in, certainly not early. Just learn to manage the data in front of you and watch it become the beauty that's there. Just take it at its word, take it for what it's worth, straight up, this to this, that to that. Enjoy that as very best you can. And I would say to you, let the variables take care of themselves. Let these weird things like blowing cloth, you'll see how to take care of it. I think the time, what you're going to find is when those moments come, you'll have an idea. So, all right. I hope you guys have a great painting week. Thank you again, Lauren Kay. Everybody, please do keep on subscribing, sharing, liking, and above all, send your comments in, okay? Maybe a few donations too would be nice. All right. I wish you well. Have a good week.